Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to this first installment of the Noon on Zoom series. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Joanna Talafrey. I'm a neuromovement practitioner based in Montreal, and I work with kids with special needs, and I also work with adults. Um, I am also the creator of the NeuroParent community group and app, brand new app. So which you are all welcome to join. This is a place where we have resources, discussions, and topics of interest for parents of kids with special needs, focused on neuroscience-backed approaches, in particular neuromovement and other scientifically based approaches. So today we're very happy to welcome Samantha Pace, who is an esteemed occupational therapist who I happen to know and have known for many, many years now. She has been working with my son, Sasha, for 6 years, I think, 7 years almost. And she's amazing. The kids love her. And so Samantha is here today to talk to us about emotional regulation from the point of view of the brain. So welcome, Samantha, and I open the mic to you.
Thank you, Joanna. So as Joanna said, my name is Samantha Pace. I'm an occupational therapist here in Montreal as well. So I'll start off by quickly explaining what occupational therapists do, because I'm sure a lot of people watching this probably don't really know. Generally, we help people engage in their daily occupations. So occupations are not only what you do for work, but really anything that occupies your time. So we obviously have a large scope of practice. We can work on many different things in many different ways and with people of all ages. So I personally work with children and their families. So the occupations I tend to focus on are things like getting dressed, participating in activities at daycare or school, following routines both at home and at daycare or school, playing, or anything else that a child needs to do or wants to do in their everyday life. So I aim to make families' everyday life more easeful and comfortable. Throughout everything we do in a day, there's one thing that always comes up. So a sort of thread throughout all of our occupations. And that thread, I find, is regulation. So kids can't engage in their occupations if they're not regulated, and parents can't support them if they themselves are not regulated. So regulation comes up a lot. And I've learned a lot throughout the years in my experience as an OT. There's so much about regulation I wish that all parents could learn. So I'm super grateful that Joanna at NeuroSomatic has invited me to share some of the things I've learned with all of you. So of course I have basics that I want to talk about, but if there are any questions at any point, Joanna, you can let me know and I'll be happy to answer them. So let's get started. First of all, what is regulation? So you've probably heard the term regulation, self-regulation, emotional regulation, and maybe even arousal regulation. So I wouldn't say they're all exactly the same thing, but for the purpose of today, I'll just use the term regulation to mean when our state matches the situation that we're in. So that could be our emotional state, our level of energy or arousal, our behavior, our motor skills, our attention. So any of those things, if they match the situation we're in, then we're regulated. So contrary to what some people may define as regulation, it doesn't mean calm, right? So sometimes I get parents, teachers that say they want the kid to be more regulated, and what they mean by that is calm. But it's not always appropriate to be calm in every situation. So if we want our kids to be playing outside at the park with their friends at recess, the regulation state shouldn't be calm. It should be full of energy and joy and movement. If this is the case, then their body state actually matches the situation they're in and they are regulated. I've also seen regulation described as being connected to others, the environment, and to self. So think about it. If you're feeling stressed and dysregulated, are you considering the other people around you as much as usual? Are you feeling what's happening inside your body? Are you attentive to what's going on around you? Probably not. So you're disconnected from your environment and from yourself, from your body. However you want to think of regulation, what we'll be talking about today sort of covers all of it in a general sense. Something else that's important to understand for our discussion is the basics of the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system is responsible for basic functions like heart rate, blood pressure, breathing, and digestion. It's made up of the parasympathetic nervous system and the sympathetic nervous system. The parasympathetic nervous system is the rest and digest system, and the sympathetic nervous system gets our body ready for mobilization and is responsible for our fight, flight, or freeze response. So these two systems are always in balance, and sometimes we're balanced more toward one than the other. So you can think of it as like a continuum or even a seesaw. So for example, if we're kind of balanced in the middle, but a little bit more towards the sympathetic nervous system, we're likely alert, engaged in movement, and doing what we want to be doing. But if our sympathetic nervous system is too activated, it takes over our autonomic nervous system, and this is when we could have a fight, flight, or freeze response. Now, where does this come from? Well, if you think of evolutionarily, if an animal like a saber-toothed tiger is coming towards us, we would typically want to fight it, literally with our body, but probably with weapons, run from it, flight, or play dead, freeze. So it makes sense when we're being chased by something that's actually dangerous. However, our bodies now still have these responses when there is a danger in our current life. So our body still sets us up to fight, flight, or freeze, even when there's no physical danger to our bodies. So this setup includes things like our heart rate increasing, our pupils dilating, sending blood to our muscles, ignoring signals of hunger, fatigue, and not stopping to take the time to think about our other options. It thinks we're in survival mode. We have to move. We have to get going. So naturally, for our survival, our body is always on the lookout for danger cues or safety cues. And the body can't tell the difference between an immediate life-threatening danger or something that will not actually hurt us. For example, a seam in a sock that's really not life-threatening may be coded as a danger to a child with sensory sensitivities. So they're still going to trigger the fight, flight, or freeze response to the seam in their sock. A change in routine, not typically life-threatening, may seem dangerous to the brain of a child who thrives on their routines and really needs that consistency. So I hope that's clear so far. If there are any questions, Johnny, again, you can just let me know.
Thank you.
So next, I'm going to give you kind of a visual of this. So I like this visual. It's Dr. Dan Siegel's hand model. So if we think of my hand here as the brain, now typically we actually have two hemispheres, so it looks something more like this, but we're going to use one hand for simplicity. So my arm, wrist here is the spinal cord. And then here, the palm of my hand, we've got the brainstem and the limbic system. So my thumb is the limbic system. The brainstem and the limbic system work together for arousal, emotions, and the fight, flight, or freeze response. My fingers are the cerebral cortex. This is the part of brain that is responsible for higher, more complex functions, so like language, reasoning, logic, and learning. This part helps regulate the lower parts of the brain, so the brainstem and the limbic area. So when a person is regulated, well-rested, has eaten, is generally doing well in the moment, the brain is all well connected, and their emotions are regulated, being controlled by the cerebral cortex, the reasoning, the logic, the language. Everything's working well and connected together. So I'm going to add a small detail to this model, and that's the amygdala. So I'm going to say that my thumb is actually the amygdala, and the amygdala is part of the limbic system, what I mentioned before. But I like to specifically say the amygdala because I like to call it the alarm of the brain. So it's the alarm because it's what decides whether something is dangerous or not. If it detects a danger, so the kind of danger I mentioned before, it can be life-threatening or not, but for whatever reason, due to past experience, sensory sensitivities, lack of sleep, the brain will code something as a danger or a threat. When this happens, the amygdala sounds the alarm and flips the lid. Now remember, the lid, so my fingers, is the cerebral cortex, where reasoning, logic, language, things like that happen. So now the cerebral cortex is no longer connected to the lower parts of the brain, where emotions and the fight, flight, or freeze response happen. This means that the fight, flight, or freeze response is activated. The sympathetic nervous system has taken over. When the lid is flipped, those higher functions, like language, learning, and reasoning, are no longer accessible. This is why when your child's brain has detected danger and their lid is flipped, and you're trying to reason with them, explain the situation, give them other options, get them to do those breathing exercises you tried, it's not working. They literally do not have access to the part of their brains they need for these things to work. It's just not an option in that moment. A side note here that I always find fascinating, the cerebral cortex, so that upper part of the brain, is actually not fully developed until adulthood, like 25 years old. So even when a child's lid is not flipped and everything's well connected and they're regulated, we still can't expect them to be able to regulate by themselves like an adult, and definitely not 100% of the time without help. It's impossible. Their brains just aren't developed like that yet. So really, regulation is a lifelong learning opportunity. And I'm sure that we all know some adults that can use some work in that domain. So now that you understand a little bit about what's happening in your child's brain when they are dysregulated, what do we do when the child's lid is flipped? Well, what we need to do is close that lid and get the brain all reconnected and functioning again. The way to do this is to provide cues of safety, right? Our brain is always trying to look for cues of danger or safety. So we need more cues of safety in order to close that lid. Close the lid and turn off their alarm. So the number one way to do this is through what is called co-regulation. So our brains and our nervous systems tend to actually imitate the nervous systems of those around us. That's why when we enter a room where two people were just arguing, we can feel it. We can feel their nervous systems, probably highly activated on the sympathetic nervous system side. Our child's nervous system will naturally, through mirror neurons, imitate our own nervous system. And it works both ways. So if your child's sympathetic nervous system is highly activated, their lid is flipped, your sympathetic nervous system will probably also initially become highly activated and your lid might begin to flip as well. However, you're an adult. Your cerebral cortex is fully developed and you have a lot more practice regulating yourself. Since it works both ways, if you're able to get yourself regulated, bringing your nervous system more into balance between the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, and close your lid, your child will sense this too, and their lid will slowly start to close and imitate yours. So this is one way to provide a cue of safety to your child. So really you, as a parent, or any adult really in the life of a child, are the child's greatest tool for regulation. Now, I'm not saying it's easy. I'm just saying that it works. When I first learned about co-regulation, of course, I was excited to try it out with some of the kids I was working with. So I used to work in a private clinic and there were gyms and swings and it was all lots of fun. And this kid I was working with loved the hammock swing. So literally like a hammock, but it's made out of Lycra. And so when our session was almost over, I told him, okay, we're going to do 10 more swings and then it's time to be done for today. So we did the 10 swings and then he actually got out of the swing. But when I went to open the door to then go to the waiting room, he kind of fell to the ground and started doing what we call, I think more in French, the bacon. So where he's kind of moving his body all around, whining, tightening his muscles, and obviously refusing to leave the room. He was non-speaking, so likely hadn't understood that it was the end of our session, or understandably wanted more time in our fun gym. Point is, he wasn't ready to go home. For whatever reason, he was dysregulated. His lid was flipped. Now, for me, looking at my own nervous system, I was stressed out too. I was definitely heading toward a flipped lid too. So I knew I had another kid in a few minutes. I had to get the gym ready. I had to go get the other kid. I had to bring this one back to his parents. His parents might see him doing the bacon on the floor and kind of judge what I'm doing. He's being loud. He might be disrupting the other kids. So I had a lot going on myself, right? My lid was about to be flipped too. But then I remembered co-regulation. So I took a second. I'm like, okay, how can I get regulated so that I can show his nervous system that we're safe? So what does work for me is deep breaths. I mean, it's taken lots of practice. And again, I'm an adult. It's easier access to me than for a child. So I sat down beside the kid who's still laying on the ground. I closed my eyes, took a few deep breaths. I told him something along the lines of, like, I see you're not ready for our session to end. That's okay. I'll sit here with you until you're ready to get up and we can go see mom together. So, of course, I'm not doing this perfectly. It's my first time co regulating consciously. So, it's probably too many words for him to really understand um, with his lip flipped. But I would assume he understood the intention behind my words. And certainly saying those words out loud helped me regulate my own nervous system, right? To really give words to what I'm trying to do. After about a minute, he eventually stopped his baconing on the ground. He gave me a kind of strange look, and then he sat up beside me. So I stood up, he stood up with me, and we went to see his parents. So I was like, oh, that works. So this seems like a good spot to mention a quote that has stuck with me since I heard it. And this quote is, your child is not giving you a hard time, they are having a hard time. Now, I think I heard it from Dr. Becky Kennedy, but it seems she might not be the source of it. Either way, I think this little shift in thinking about a child's experience when they're having a meltdown, or they're dysregulated, can make a big difference in your response. I think it immediately gives your own nervous system a safety cue, right? That your child's not doing this on purpose. There's something going on. Let's try to understand it. It begins to make it easier for you to regulate yourself. You can't control another person's nervous system, but you can try to control your own. And as we learned, co-regulation makes it so that actually regulating your own nervous system does actually impact other people's nervous systems. I'm also definitely not saying that you should be able to perfectly co-regulate with your child every single time they feel danger and their lid is flipped. That's impossible. But I just think that understanding these concepts can make a big difference in how we approach dysregulation in our kids. So if you are regulated, it will be much easier for you to help your child regulate too. I saw recently a video of a mom who said she was so tired and dysregulated. She was trying to get her kids to go to bed, but they were full of energy, running around the room or on the counter. But instead of yelling at them that it was time for bed or trying to force them into bed or whatever, anything she typically does, she tried just sitting on the ground and she became a monster. So when they would run by her, she would kind of roar and reach out for them and then just sit back down until one of them ran around her again. So this way, she was able to let out some of her frustration through the roaring and kind of that movement. And she was giving into some of her exhaustion by just sitting down. And she was lightening the emotional load by being playful. So that brings me to another way to show cues of safety to our kids. And that's playfulness, silliness. So the video I just explained is a good example of that. So doing things through playfulness, silliness, fun increases connection with children. I honestly think it increases connection with adults too. I think that we should play more in general, but side note. And connection is a cue of safety. So a simple example that I sometimes use when I'm with a kid, it's time to put their shoes on, let's say, and they don't want to, so I can see that their lid is getting almost to a flipped point. Often what I'll do is I just pretend to put their shoes on my feet. And I go, oh, maybe I'll try putting your shoes on. What do you think? Do they fit? And often, usually it works. So instead of making it a power struggle where I'm just saying, our time's up, I have another kid, it's time to go back to class, anything like that, I make it a little bit silly. And this gives a cue of safety to the kid, right? If I'm able to be silly and playful in the moment, then that means my nervous system is likely a little more regulated than theirs, and they can get that cue that they're safe. Another thing that's coming up in kind of both of those examples is movement. So movement is another way to provide our bodies with cues of safety. So some information in our body goes from our brains to our bodies, yes, but actually a lot of information comes from our bodies and goes to our brain, especially to let us know if we're safe. So sometimes just changing positions, like getting your child to sit up instead of lie down or stand up instead of sit down, can be a small shift towards safety. You can also do things like shaking out some of those bigger feelings by literally shaking your body along with your child. So again, anything you're doing with your child, you're creating that connection and that safety. So you can do that through the co-regulation, silliness, play, movement, just as examples. Another possible cue of safety: if your child likes hugs, a hug can be a cue of safety. So if a child knows that they're still loved and accepted, even when they're having a meltdown, big emotions, this can help tip them towards safety as well. One of the families I'm currently working with started using this beautifully. So they knew their kiddo, who was about 5 now, he always was regulated by hugs. That was always something that worked well for him. And now that he's older, he was getting meltdowns, like when it was time to clean up, and he'd be throwing the toys and getting really dysregulated. So they eventually tried something. And so when he would get dysregulated like this, they would say, "Oh, come here, I just want a hug." So they would just kind of give him a hug or get him to give them a hug. And so they did this a few times. And now, in those moments where he's feeling dysregulated, instead of throwing toys, he just goes like, "I need a hug." And then his parents give him a hug, and it helps to give him that cue of safety. So I thought that was a really creative way to get that in there. Hugs also stimulate the proprioceptive sensory system, which tends to be regulating for our bodies, for kids and adults. I don't want to get into it too much here, but basically, proprioception is sensory information we get from our muscles and our joints, and it helps our body understand body position and movement. So, providing input to our muscles and our joints through deep pressure, like a hug, or movement, like shaking our bodies, helps ground us by giving our brain more information about where we are in space, which evidently is reassuring and a cue of safety to our bodies. I do feel like there's still so much to talk about, but I think that that's a lot of information, and I think it's a good start, just knowing about these different concepts and how it's relating to your child's dysregulation and your own. So, what I would love for you to take away from our discussion today is that regulating yourself is just as important as helping to regulate your child. I think that understanding a little bit more about what's happening in your brain and body when you're dysregulated and in your child's brain can be super helpful in having a bit of a mindset shift in your approach to regulating kids. It does take practice, observation skills, and patience to really start to understand your child's own signs of safety regulation or danger or dysregulation and your own. But I do believe that it can make a difference. I also think that self-compassion is an important point here. And if you have no idea what that is, I do encourage you to check out Kristen Neff's work on self-compassion. But basically, none of this is easy. It's helpful to accept that, be kind to yourself, be compassionate towards yourself, because it really only makes you more compassionate towards others and your child. So I did create a resource, so kind of like a small summary of what I spoke about today, and then some examples of what it can look like when you or your child are regulated, dysregulated, with a section for you to put your own, so you can start to observe your own signs of dysregulation and regulation and your child's. And then, of course, what to do. So some of the ideas I spoke about today, but some other ones as well. And then again, a place for you to add what works for you and your family. Because really every child is unique, every family is unique. So it does take some trial and error and getting to know your own family and their regulation patterns to find what works best for you. Now, I believe, Joanna, you said it'll be available on the platform, on the parent platform for
Yes,
NeuroSomatic.
we'll
Yeah,
put all the resources up on the NeuroParent platform free space.
perfect. Yeah. And then I also had a little section there in the resource document for further resources. So there's like the link to the Dan Siegel's brain hand model. And then I mentioned Becky Kennedy too. So I have, anyways, whatever I mentioned today, I have a few links so that you can go find out more in what's relevant to you. So I think that's it for today. If there are any questions, I'm super open to that. I love answering questions. And Joanna too, if you have anything to add or any questions, anything you want me to talk more about too,
Yeah,
we can go
I do
from there.
wanna add, yeah, thank you, Sam. That was really useful and a very good summary. I think I wanted to bounce off of one of the things that you said, maybe two of the things that you said that I discovered recently is, I think for parents, um, sometimes it's hard to understand why their kids are having this meltdown or why their kids are having this reaction. Of, they can understand that the kid is having a crisis for a certain reason, but not why. And so what you explain with the alarm system with the brain is very useful, but I think it's also useful to understand that a child will interpret, and particularly neurodivergent kids will have a hard time understanding certain signals, and they will, that coding error where you say the seam in the sock is interpreted as a danger is actually because they're having a hard time making sense of the world around them, and of all the sensations that they're receiving through their body. And so one of the things that I found very useful is also to remember that we as parents are responsible for helping our child assign meaning to things. So if your child is having a problem with the seam in the sock, we have to help them understand the difference between a seam in the sock threat symptom or a seam in the sock irritating symptom, and really make them go through that differentiation so that their brain doesn't always get in the loop of interpreting the seam in the sock as a threat. So this is something that's coming up a lot, at least in my practice, is helping the brain from a state of calm understand the differences between what's a threat and a stress that is a legitimate, that requires a certain kind of answer, and then what is not. And so, the co-regulation is super important because, of course, then we respond to our child's reaction to something. So when we respond with stress to our child's reaction to a sock, we assign the meaning of stress to the sock. Basically, we're sort of partaking in the production of that feedback. So this is really important, I think, for us parents to understand that when a child has a disability or a diagnosis of something, that they're having a hard time assigning meaning to the world around them, making sense of the world. And our role as parents, as regulated parents, is to come in and assign the meaning for them. And so we do that through co-regulation. We do that through the body. But I think also even for kids who are nonverbal, when they hear the sound of our voice in a calm and relaxed way, explaining to them and narrating to them what's happening or what's going to happen, uh, it helps them understand that we're not also joining in the stress reaction or having, participating in the meltdown ourselves, basically. I don't know if this makes sense to you. Um, yes.
Yes,
Anyway.
absolutely. Yeah, it's a good
Mhm.
point, Jana. Yeah, and it's great to get that point of view of it too, right? Because you have kids, you know what works for your kids, but like it's trial and error, right? But those are the things you learn, and the things that stick with us are the things that we want to share with other people. So yes, thank you. I think that makes a lot
Exactly.
of sense. Yeah.
And I really like the thing that you say about self-compassion because, the number of times that I, as a mom, have felt like I, massively failed because I wasn't able to help my child, or I just literally jumped in with my own dysregulation, So we're not perfect. Obviously, we're all humans. And even though, um, we are able to implement certain things um, in certain contexts, like for example, with other people's children. Sometimes at home we have all of the emotional baggage and the expectations and the ideals that are above us that are acting as obstacles essentially to our own regulation. So it's very useful for us to do the work on ourselves and to understand what's causing our stress in certain situations. Well, I like to say to the parents of the kids I work with, you are the intervention. It's not something you do; it's something you are, basically. So anyway, I hope that is useful. I don't know if there are any questions or contributions.
Thank you, ladies, and thank you for unmuting me. I cannot do this on my phone. I don't know why. So I love everything you say, and Jana, I have a further question to your distinction. The seam of the sock, um, to make the to help the child understand whether it's a threat or just something annoying. would you do this by talking, even with you mentioned kids who are not verbal, or how do you
I think
do
Ideally,
that?
I would do this through sensory differentiation. So I would, first of all, I would point to the most kids, they feel something irritating. They don't necessarily know that it's the seam of the sock. So, let's look at the seam of the sock and then let's play it around the hand, or let's feel it around here. Oh, is that pleasant? It's not pleasant. Or, or we go about it curiously. Does it bother you here? Does it bother you there? Find a way for them to understand what it is that's giving them the sensation, and then maybe create a solution out of it. Let's reverse the sock, or, what can we do with the sock? Or, so that the child themselves, through their own brain, can understand the difference between that and, having the sock on, not having the sock on. So I think just by kind of going at it through little variations or little approximations, you can feed the brain with information that would be useful in understanding, regardless of the level of the child, basically. To understand the difference between an irritating sock and a non-irritating socks, you need to know both, basically, I guess.
Okay, thank
What
you.
would- what would you suggest?
I think, well, it's a good point that's brought up too. We don't want to be talking about it, especially if they're in that dysregulation state. It's really like, okay, we had a hard time with the seam of our sock today. What could we do later on in the day when my child is regulated to do that differentiation, right? And so I think sensory is always a great, I'm an OT, I do a lot of sensory, so that's a great way to do it for sure. And again, by doing that, right, putting the seam on your cheek, on your body, that's kind of playful. So that's again a cue of safety to the nervous system. And you can never have too many cues of safety. So even if the child's already regulated, just adding more safety to, you're also adding safety to the seam of the sock, right? If they're getting those good experiences with the seam of the sock, it might actually end up being a little bit less dangerous to them in those dysregulated moments.
I think also one of the things that Heike's comment uh, illustrates for me is also that our children will tend to flip their lids, as you say, in anticipation of something. So, when it's time to get dressed and you say, let's go get dressed, the child, because they've had a negative experience with their sock, will immediately anticipate the stress that will come from the sock. And they're going to refuse to get dressed. They're going to already enter into dysregulation mode. They will, and so this is why people always say, oh, my child refuses or they're non-compliant or something like that. And first of all, we need to not confuse compliance with regulation, but we also have to understand that they're not resisting the act of getting dressed. They're anticipating something that is painful for them, that is a source of suffering. So we have to make sure that we know what those things are, which requires, like you said, a lot of observation. And then, practice doing those things in moments of playfulness and in moments of safety, with curiosity and non-judgment of what our child might feel about something, until they feel safe enough to tell us, I just don't want to put on that pair of socks, basically. Or, I mean, tell us, not in necessarily in words, but you know what I mean. So we can limit the overflow. Yeah. Heike, do you want to say something else?
So you would, thank you. So you would probably do the sock game later in the day, when the meltdown is over. So you maybe go without socks in the morning and address this issue later on and solve it at a better time.
Yeah, I would, honestly, what I would do is that I would bring the socks to lunch. And I would play, or whatever, or bath time or something, and play with the sock in a place which is completely unassociated to any kind of
Mm,
pleasure,
mm,
and just have it associated with other stuff. But
mm,
I would also play with the foot. I would also understand what is the sensation around the foot? What is going on with this toe? And if I touch this toe this way, what happens? Because there's obviously sensitivity there. So we can help the child feel their toe and feel their foot in a way that is non-threatening through touch, through movement, through all of those things, and then later on you associate the sock if the sock is absolutely needed. I mean, thankfully now we have sock seam-free sock options, but I think the point is for a child to learn through those things. Those things are all learning opportunities, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I guess it all starts with us parents understanding that a sock can be a threat.
Yes, absolutely. A sock can be a threat.
A sock can be a threat.
Yeah, and I think just understanding what's actually going on in the brain, right, makes us more understanding towards our children, more compassionate towards our children.
Mm.
Because okay, no, I know they're not they're not doing this on purpose, right? It really is a danger to their brain. They don't know the difference between a tiger chasing them and a seam on the sock. It's doing the same thing.
Yeah, and the other thing that I find also very important to raise is that because our children are often unable to do things for themselves, we tend to override them a lot. And as you know, for example, we have to comply with a certain type of schedule. We have to go to school. And, even though they're telling us or sending us the message, they're on alert, they're having a hard time, we tend to override their nervous system a lot. And so allowing them to reconnect to their body's signals in when we are not under threat, when we are not under stress, also helps them become agents of their own regulation. So it's not necessarily that they're going to depend on us to always be there, but they also need to respect the signals that their body is giving them. And this, I mean, we experienced this when my son was having feeding issues. So, by forcing a child to eat, you're just overriding their nervous system. All of a sudden, they don't know how to understand what's going on inside them because their body is telling them something, you're telling them something else. And that is I would say very dangerous for particularly for a child who has already a hard time making sense of the world. So finding playful moments where you can explore different sensations is also a very creative process and very nourishing process for the whole family, I would say. Okay,
Yeah,
that's it.
and emotional regulation always comes back to our bodies, right? Even as adults, we have to know what we're sensing in our body to know when we're dysregulated, right? I can 100% tell you, I have a lot of adults in my life that I know they're not feeling what's going on in their body. I can see it, right? I have the practice. I can see it in their body. I know it in myself, but it takes work. So imagine if we know a lot of adults that don't know this, our kids are just learning. So, like you say, Joanna, it has to be done through play. We're going to do games I do it with a lot of my kids, right? Just exploring cold and hot. That's a super basic thing, but my palms get sweaty when I'm nervous. I have to feel that heat. So it's really just getting in touch with our bodies, and helping our kids get in touch with their bodies is one of those first steps towards self-regulation. So there's co-regulation, that's important. They need the adults in their life to regulate with them. And then there's getting in touch with their bodies, and like you say, listening to their bodies. So whenever adults are telling them their bodies are wrong, no, this food is not dangerous to you, they're not able to trust their own bodies. So we have to give them that trust for their bodies too.
Yeah. Great. Wonderful. Well, thank you both for being here and contributing. Just as a follow-up, like I said, the resources will be put up on the NeuroParent platform. And if you have any questions for Samantha, you can find her online in her on her social media or in her web page. I think you have a web page. And or for me the same, and we are very thankful, and we hope this was useful to everybody, and the recording will be also made available on the NeuroParent platform.
Thank you, Joanna. Thank you, Heike.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Samantha. Thank you, Joanna. Have a good day.
You
Bye.
too.
Bye bye.
Bye.